A dog-shaped hole in a broken heart. Anna Maria Island, Florida. The salt air of Anna Maria Island still carried Tom's scent long after he was gone. Margaret noticed it most in the mornings, when the Gulf breeze slipped through the open sliders of their little turquoise cottage on Pine Avenue. She would wake, reaching for him, fingers brushing the cold, empty side of the bed where he used to lie. Newspapers spread wide, glasses perched low, grumbling about the Marlins. Tom died in March. A sudden, massive heart attack while he tightened the straps on the kayak rack. 68 years old, still strong enough to wrestle the boats himself. Gone in minutes. For weeks, the house felt like a museum of their 31-year marriage. His flip-flops still waited by the door. The half-empty bottle of Old Spice stood sentinel on the bathroom counter. Binoculars rested on the lanai table where they used to watch roseate spoonbills glide in at sunset. Margaret drifted through the rooms like a ghost, speaking to no one, eating nothing, answering the phone only when her daughter called from Atlanta. And even then, with a voice so thin, it scared them both. The grief counselor in Bradenton spoke softly. Some widows find comfort in routine. Maybe volunteer or adopt a pet. Margaret gave a short, brittle laugh. They had never owned pets. Tom was allergic to cats, and dogs, he insisted, belonged on boats or in truck beds, not on white sofas. She left clutching a pamphlet she never intended to open. But the house was too quiet. The silence had teeth. One Saturday in June, the silence finally won. Margaret drove north to Bishop Animal Shelter in Bradenton, telling herself she was just looking. A young kennel worker with purple streaks in her hair led her past rows of barking dogs to the very last run. There, sitting quietly while chaos erupted around him, was a dog who wasn't barking at all. Medium-sized, maybe 45 pounds, the color of wet sand. Part shepherd, part mystery. One ear flopped, the other stood straight, like he could never decide what kind of dog he wanted to be. His ribs showed faintly beneath blonde fur. The card read, Remy, for your Führers, owner surrendered, loves the beach. Margaret crouched. Remy padded forward, tail low, and gently pressed his forehead to the chain link. Not frantic, not demanding, just present. She slipped her fingers through the diamonds of the fence. He sniffed once, then rested his chin on her wrist, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for her to arrive. She cried right there on the concrete floor. Ugly, wrenching tears that startled even her. The purple-haired girl looked away and pretended not to notice. 2 days later, Remy came home. That first night, he refused to leave her side. Margaret sat on the lanai with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the black water beyond the dunes. Remy laid his head on her bare foot. When she finally shuffled to bed, he followed and curled into the exact hollow Tom used to fill. She started to nudge him off, then didn't. She fell asleep with her hand buried in the warm ruff of his neck and woke 8 hours later, the longest stretch of sleep she'd had since March. New routines built themselves around him. At dawn, they walked the sugar sand beach before the tourists arrived. Remy chased ghost crabs, then always circled back, sand flying, to be sure she was still there. She began talking, really talking about the stab of an empty driveway, the guilt of laughing at a sitcom, the nights she still set 2 plates on the table without thinking. Remy listened the way only dogs can, brown eyes steady, offering the one gift no human had managed permission to fall apart without being fixed. One evening in late August, the sky turned that electric Florida green that warns of coming storms. Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing conch shells collected over 31 years of marriage, when the tears ambushed her again. She sank to the tile floor, clutching a perfect queen conch to her chest. 45 pounds of determined dog wedged himself into her lap, licked the salt from her cheeks, until she laughed through the sobs, then laid his head directly over her heart, and stayed there while thunder marched across the gulf, anchoring her until the storm inside grew quieter than the one outside. Months slipped by. Neighbors who once waved tentatively now smiled wide when they saw her coming. Margaret in her sun hat, Remy trotting beside her, leash loose because he never pulled. She joined the island's 4th of July dog parade. She let him sleep on Tom's pillow. Slowly, carefully, she started saying yes when friends invited her to dinner instead of no. 1 year to the day after Tom died, Margaret paddled their old kayak to Bean Point at sunset. Remy rode proudly in the bow, ears flapping like flags. She scattered the last of Tom's ashes into water turned liquid gold. When she turned the boat toward home, she didn't cry. The ache was still there, but beneath it ran something warmer, something like gratitude. That night, she sat on the lani with a glass of Tom's favorite cheap Pinot Grigio and watched Remy chase lightning bugs across the yard. The house no longer felt like a museum. It felt lived in, full. Margaret raised her glass toward the dark gulf. "Thank you for sending him," she whispered to Tom, "to the universe, to whatever gentle force matches shattered hearts with four-pawed healers. I thought I'd never be whole again. Turns out I just needed someone who would never try to fill your space. Only sit beside the hole you left until it stopped feeling quite so deep." Remy flopped at her feet, gave the deep, contented sigh of a dog who has finally found his person, and together they listened to the waves the way she and Tom once had. The silence no longer had teeth. It had a heartbeat steady, warm, and undeniably alive resting against her ankle. Sometimes the greatest love arrives on four paws, exactly when the heart thinks it will never beat right again. If this story touched you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to remember. Healing often wears fur and answers to a new name.